Monadic Experiences. Experiences of the monad are generally classified as mystical states of consciousness by researchers. This is unfortunate because the word mystical is often construed as meaning vague, sentimental, occult, or metaphorical. The truth is that encounters with the monad are solid experiences of reality, perhaps more real than our everyday world, because they represent the ground of being on which the evolved world rests. In the Buddhist tradition, the experience of the monad is called Nirvana, from the Sanskrit word meaning blown out in reference to the flame of a candle or oil lamp. What is blown out or extinguished is the egocentric focus that prevents us from experiencing the fundamental nature of reality. In the Nirvana experience, the light of the individual mind is transcended and replaced by the light of the monadic mind, and there is a merging of individual will and identity with the greater reality. Spanish noblewoman Teresa of Avila, 1515 to 1582, described the experience as a drop of rain falling into a great ocean, but once merged, how can they be distinguished? According to the highly respected American psychologist William James, 1842 to 1910, the mystical state of consciousness refers to a genuine experience associated with a precise state of mind. In his book The Varieties of Religious Experience, 1902, he wrote, "Our normal waking consciousness is but one special type of consciousness. While all around it, parted from it by the filmiest of screens, there lie potential forms of consciousness entirely different. No account of the universe in its totality can be final, which leaves these other forms of consciousness disregarded." James discovered 4 characteristics of genuine mystical states of consciousness. 1. Ineffability. It cannot be fully described and must be directly experienced to be understood. 2. Noetic. There is a deep gnosis or direct insight into truth. 3. Transiency. The state is impermanent but can recur. 4. Passivity. Personal will is transcended in a merging with something greater. Extrovertive monistic experiences. The experience of the monad is one of the most widely reported mystical states of consciousness. British philosopher Robert Charles Zaehner, 1913 to 1974, listed the experience of the monad as the most common category in his classifications of mystical experiences. He defined it as a monistic experience of an undifferentiated unity transcending space and time. In his book Mysticism and Philosophy, 1960, British philosopher Walter Terence Stace, 1886 to 1967, noted that the experience is found in all cultures, religions, periods, and social conditions. Stace defines it as a universal monistic extrovertive experience. An extrovertive experience is one that is directed outward or is focused on an independent external reality. In his book, Stace defines the experience. A universal monistic extrovertive experience is one that looks outward through the senses to apprehend the one or the oneness of all in or through the multiplicity of the world, apprehending the one as an inner life or consciousness of the world. The oneness is experienced as a sacred objective reality, in a feeling of bliss and joy. In general, extrovertive experiences of the monad share most of the 10 characteristics that follow. Extrovertive monistic experiences. 1. The experience begins in a state of non-duality or oneness. 2. It seems to take place in a boundless space of pure warm light. 3. Everything is stripped away, no more ego, striving, or worldly attachments. 4. The basic dichotomy of I versus other is transcended. 5. There is a sense of original self or primal state of being in which just your pure centerless awareness or default presence remains. 6. It is beyond thoughts or exhibits the inability to have thoughts, and because of this, there is no fear. 7. There is a sense of eternity with no experience of time. 8. There is a feeling of complete knowledge or direct gnosis of reality. 9. The overall feeling is one of infinite security, serenity, and satisfaction. 10. In describing the experience to others, it remains paradoxical and ineffable. Dante Alighieri's Monadic Vision. The experiences of Italian poet and philosopher Dante Alighieri, 1265 to 1321, are classed as a theistic monistic encounter that also demonstrates how the pure act of love may open a portal to universal consciousness. Beatrice Portinari, the object of his unrequited love, filled him with deep spiritual longing for union, but he could only worship her silently from afar. Dante first met Beatrice when they were both 9 years old, and he immediately fell in love with her. He met her again 9 years later at her marriage to a prosperous banker in 1283. It is said that she laughed at his adoration, causing him considerable embarrassment. Then, Dante saw Beatrice again in a chance meeting along the Arno River in Florence. She was dressed in white and accompanied by 2 older women. She turned and greeted him, and her salutation alone filled him with such joy that he retired to his room to reflect on their chance meeting. In his journal, he described what happened next. Retiring to the loneliness of mine own room, I fell to thinking of this most courteous lady, thinking of whom I was overtaken by a pleasant slumber, wherein a marvelous vision was presented me. There appeared in my room a mist the color of fire, within which I discerned the figure of a being terrifying to gaze upon him. Yet I rejoiced inwardly to see such a marvel. Speaking, he said many things, though I could understand but few. I discerned him say, "I am your Lord." In his arms he carried a sleeping person covered only with a crimson cloth. Upon looking closely, I knew it was Beatrice, the lady of the salutation, who had deigned the day before to salute me. And he who held her held also in his hand my own heart burning in flames, and he said to me, "Behold your heart." After a little while, he set to awaken Beatrice, and then he made her eat my flaming heart in his hand. The brief encounter along the river walk in Florence was the last time Dante saw Beatrice. She died quietly in her sleep during the night of June 8, 1290, at the age of 25. This crisis becomes the catalyst for Dante's book La Vita Nuova, The New Life, which he worked on from 1290 to 1300, completing it at age 27. The book contains his account of his deep platonic love for Beatrice, whom he describes as the glorious lady of my mind. Beatrice becomes his ideal, a living spirit existing in eternal perfection who can never fail him. In the final pages of La Vita Nuova and later in his Divine Comedy, she becomes the ultimate symbol of divine light and salvation. Behold, Dante wrote of Beatrice, a deity stronger than I, who coming, shall rule over me. She has ineffable courtesy, is my beatitude, the destroyer of all vices, and the queen of virtue. Salvation. For Dante, in the time of courtly love, Beatrice was less an object of carnal lust and more of a platonic savior, one who purifies and removes base emotions and all evil intentions from him. Dante fell in love not with a person but with the idea of pure love, and that opened up in him a monadic point of eternal repose and amazing creativity. Between 1308 and his death in 1321, Dante composed what is widely recognized to be one of the greatest works of world literature, La Divina Commedia, Italian for the Divine Comedy. The epic poem describes Dante's journey through the Inferno, Hell, Purgatorio, Purgatory, and Paradiso, Paradise, to eventually come face to face with God. At the lower levels, he is guided by the Roman poet Virgil, but in Paradise, his guide becomes Beatrice, who carries the true beatific vision of the ultimate direct confrontation between the individual self and the ineffable source of creation. In Paradise, Dante writes, he is transfixed by the power of the light. O grace abounding and allowing me to Dorado fix my gaze on the eternal light, so deep my vision was consumed in it. I saw how it contains within its depths all things bound in a single book by love, of which creation is the scattered leaves. How substance, accident, and their relation were fused in such a way that what I now describe is but a glimmer of that light. Dante defined the monad in terms of the empyrean, which is the highest heaven in an etheric realm of pure fire and light. It is the dwelling place of God and other celestial beings made of pure light. The empyrean is the source of all light and consciousness in the universe and is responsible for the creation of physical existence. That monadic source dwells in the inapproachable light of the empyrean for most of us. A person possessing Dante's beatific vision achieves salvation in its entirety, not imperfectly through earthbound faith, but perfectly in the mind, heart, and soul from experiencing the monadic unity directly. Dante's salvation is a mystical vision of the transcendent principle that holds the universe together bound by love. Jacob Boehme's monadic light. The German shoemaker-philosopher Jacob Boehme, 1575–624, had several powerful experiences of universal consciousness in his life. The first occurred in 1600 in Görlitz, Germany, when he was 25 years old. He was alone in his room when the reflected sunlight from a burnished pewter dish suddenly filled the room with such marvelous splendor and intelligence that he entered a heightened state in which he felt he could now look into the deepest source or innermost truth of everything in the world. So overcome was he by the experience that he rushed out into a nearby park to see if what he felt was real. There, he gazed into the very heart of things, the thing itself of herbs and grass, and that hidden foundation of things harmonized with what he inwardly saw. Boehme was a humble shoemaker and thought no one would believe him, so he kept the experience private at first. But as the inner light continued to reappear in his life, he later decided to write about this experience in his book De Signatore Rerum, Latin for the signature of all things, 1621. In 1610, at the age of 35, Boehme had another profound experience with the mysterious light. Now he beheld the universe as a coherent whole, whereas previously he had seen only chaotic fragments. In his personal journal, Boehme elaborated on what had taken place. The gate was opened to me that in 1/4 of an hour, I saw and knew more than if I had been many years at a university. For I saw and knew the being of all beings, the BYSS and Abyss, the eternal generation of the Trinity, the descent and origin of the world and of all creatures through the divine wisdom. I knew and saw in myself all the three worlds, namely, 1. The divine, spiritual or paradisical. 2. The dark, the original fuel of nature in the fire. And 3. The external or visible world, being a procreation or external birth from both the internal and spiritual worlds. And I saw and knew the whole working essence in the evil and the good and the original and the existence of each of them. Likewise, I saw how the fruitful bearing womb of eternity brought them forth, so that I did not only greatly wonder at my experience but did also exceedingly rejoice. In 1612, Boehme began keeping a journal of his experiences he called Die Morgenröte im Aufgang, German for the morning redness in the rising of the sun. But a friend changed the name to simply Aurora, the dawn light, and began circulating the unfinished manuscript. A copy fell into the hands of the chief pastor of Görlitz, who considered the work heresy and threatened to exile Boehme if he continued working on it. Finally, at the insistence of people who had read Aurora, Boehme began writing again in 1618 and would eventually produce over 24 treatises, all of which were secretly copied by hand and circulated among his followers. In his writings, Boehme proclaimed that all things arise from a formless void he called the Ungrund, German for the place without ground. According to Boehme, this infinite abyss is brought to manifestation by the primordial urge of the divine mind to become conscious of itself. Aurobindo's experience of Supermind. Aurobindo goes, 1872–1950. Known simply as Sri Aurobindo, was an Indian philosopher, yogi, and poet who was an influential leader in the Indian movement for independence from British rule. He developed a system of integral yoga that views our longing to evolve spiritually as part of a greater process in which nature is seeking to evolve beyond mind. Human evolution is an intermediate stage in the evolution of the state of being, which ultimately is about self-revelation of the divinity in all things. At the center of Aurobindo's system is the state beyond mind that he referred to as supermind, literally, above or beyond mind. This is an embryonic, intermediary level between the unmanifested monad, or Brahman as ultimate reality, and the manifested world. The wordless state of supermind is not completely separate from us, since it exists in potentiality within our own minds. In his book The Integral Yoga, 1993, Aurobindo clarifies, by the supermind is meant the full truth consciousness of the divine nature in which there can be no place for the principle of division and ignorance. It is always a full light and knowledge superior to all mental substance or mental movement. In The Life Divine, 1919, Aurobindo describes how we are able to experience the highest truths because we share in the universal spirit. There is then a supreme reality, eternal, absolute, and infinite. It is in its essence indeterminable. It is indefinable and inconceivable by the finite and defining mind. It is ineffable by the mind. Created speech, it is not that. Nor will we find it in our affirmations, for we cannot fix it by saying it is this or it is that. Although unknowable, it is self-evident to itself, and although inexpressible, it is self-evident to the spiritual being in us. For that spiritual being is in its essence and in its original and intimate reality, not other than this supreme existence. Aurobindo's experience of nirvana is one of the clearest descriptions of the monadic state ever written. As we've remarked, nirvana is a Sanskrit word that literally means blown out, as in an oil lamp. It is attained during one's life, when all fires are extinguished, including the ability to have thoughts. In Hindu philosophy, nirvana is a state of perfect quietude, pure awareness, and freedom from fear, as well as liberation from the cycle of rebirth. It is the ultimate realization of the union of the Atman, the individual soul, with Brahman, the monad or ultimate reality. In his sonnet Cosmic Consciousness, Aurobindo summarizes how the experience felt. I pass beyond time and life on measureless wings, yet still am one with born and inborn things. He described the experience in more detail in his poem Nirvana. All is abolished but the mute alone. The mind from thought released, the heart from grief, grow inexistent now beyond belief. There is no I, no nature, known unknown. The city, a shadow picture without tone, floats, quivers unreal, forms without relief. Flow, a cinema's vacant shapes. Like a reef foundering in shoreless gulfs, the world is done. Only the illimitable permanent is here. A peace stupendous, featureless, still, replaces all what once was I, in it. A silent, unnamed emptiness content, either to fade in the unknowable, or thrill with the luminous seas of the infinite. In a letter to a friend, Aurobindo said this poem was as close a transcription of a major experience as could be given in language coined by the human mind, of a realization in which the mind was entirely silent and into which no intellectual conception could at all enter. I felt with an overpowering vividness the illimitability, or at least something which could not be described by any other term, and no other description except the permanent could be made of that which alone existed. In another letter, Aurobindo elaborated further on what he described in his poem Nirvana. My experience of nirvana and silence in the Brahman came first simply by an absolute stillness and blotting out, as it were, of all mental, emotional and other inner activities. I did not become aware of any pure I or even of any self, impersonal or other. There was only an awareness of that as the sole reality, all else being quite unsubstantial, void, non-real. As to what realized that reality, it was a nameless consciousness which was not other than that. One could perhaps say this, though hardly even so much as this. since there was no mental concept of it, but not more. Neither was I aware of any lower soul or outer self called by such and such a personal name that was performing this feat of arriving at the consciousness of Nirvana. Mark that I did not think these things, there were no thoughts or concepts, nor did they present themselves like that to any me. It simply just was so, or was self-apparently so. Near-death experiences. The near-death experience is a profound personal experience associated with impending death in which individuals report the presence of transcendent light, warmth, ultimate security, absolute dissolution of ego, feelings of floating or detachment from the body, and other descriptions of a transcendent, unified reality. From their reports, it is clear experiencers are encountering some sort of monadic environment after death. Researchers agree near-death experiences are a physiological and psychological reality of clinical significance, although there is no consensus on how they occur or what they mean. Adam Tapp's monadic death. On February 28, 2018, paramedic Adam Tapp B., 1983, was working in his shop in London, England, when he was electrocuted by a 12,000-volt DC itching device. Luckily, his paramedic friend Mark Wilson was there and disconnected the machine. He shouted for Tapp's wife, Stephanie, who is a cardiac RN, and they both began CPR and called an ambulance. Adam's heart stopped for over 11 minutes, but he clung to life in a coma for the next 6 hours. When recovered, he described having a true experience of what was behind reality. All of a sudden, I was in a place that I felt I had always been, he said. It was black at first and just seemed like empty space. I wasn't Adam. I wasn't a paramedic. I wasn't anything. It was like this raw form of consciousness where I was just existing very happily and pleasantly. Next, a light or frequency washed over me, and I saw iridescent geometric shapes and patterns like gasoline floating on water. Then, I just started fading into the fabric of the universe. It was so warm and peaceful and pleasant. Afterwards, Tapp said his sense of time was distorted, and he didn't feel comfortable in physical reality. It actually took me a while to feel comfortable in my body again, he said. Just breathing, I was so hyper-aware of having to take a breath. It took me a couple months, I just felt so foreign in my own body. He later explained how the experience changed his viewpoint on life. What I take away from it is this absolute, unequivocal feeling that death is supposed to happen. It might not be pleasant, and we might not want it, but it is supposed to happen. It is very literally a necessary part of all life. As fearful as these moments are for people, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's actually deeply beautiful. Tapp's experience brings to mind the words of the British poet William Blake, 1757 to 1827. I cannot think of death as more than the going out of one room into another. Many people who have had genuine near-death experiences describe it in much the same way. However, objective analysis is difficult in this area since the majority of those who have had near-death experiences tailor their descriptions to fit their personal philosophy or religious expectations. Aaron Green, What Happens When We Die? Of all the personal accounts of monadic near-death experiences I've researched, few capture the depth of the experience better than a fictional character named Aaron Green, portrayed by actor Kate Siege, in a 2021 Netflix miniseries based on the novel Midnight Mass by F. Paul Wilson. I include it here because it describes most of the elements and insights reported in the literature and is a penetrating summary of such experiences. At the end of the series, Erin lies dying alone on a beach beneath a canopy of stars. A vision of her dead boyfriend, Riley Flynn, portrayed by actor Zach Gilford, appears and asks her, "What do you think happens when we die?" She answers him silently in her mind. "Speaking for myself. Myself. Myself." That's the problem, that's the whole problem with the whole thing, that word, self. That's not the word. That's not right. That isn't. How did I forget that? How could I forget that? The body stops a cell at a time, but the brain keeps firing those neurons, little lightning bolts like fireworks inside. And I thought I would feel afraid, but I don't feel any of that. None of it, because I'm too busy. I'm too busy in this moment, remembering. Of course, I remember that every atom in my body was forged in a star. This matter, this body, is mostly just empty space after all. Solid matter, just energy vibrating very slowly. And there is no me, there never was. The electrons in my body mingle and dance with the electrons in the ground below me and in the air. I am no longer breathing. And I remember. There is no point where any of that ends and I begin. I remember I am energy. Not memories, not self. My name, my personality, my choices all came after me. I was before them, and I will be after them. Everything else is pictures picked up along the way, fleeting little dreamlets printed on the tissue of my dying brain. And I am the lightning that jumps between. I am the energy firing the neurons. And I'm returning. Just by remembering, I'm returning home, like a drop of water falling back into the ocean of which it had always been a part. All things are a part, all of us. A part you, me, the children, and my mother and my father, everyone who has ever been, every plant, every animal, every atom, every star, every galaxy, all of it. More galaxies in the universe than grains of sand on the beach, and that is what we're talking about when we say God, the One, the cosmos and its innocent dreams. We are the cosmos dreaming of itself. It's simply a dream that I think is my life, every time. But I'll forget this, I always do. I always forget my dreams. But now, in this split second, in the moment I remember, the instant I remember, I comprehend everything at once. There is no time. There is no death. Life is a dream. A wish. Again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and on through eternity. And I am all of it. I am everything. I am all. I am that I am. Author's Extrovertive Experience of the Monad. In my poem Prairie God, 1966, and book The Emerald Tablet, Alchemy for Personal Transformation, 1999, I describe a monadic experience I had in 1952, when I was 7 years old. Our family lived in one of those red brick tenement houses in South Chicago, and my mother had taken me to a free clinic to get a polio shot. I distinctly remember how filthy the clinic was, and the mangy old dog they let wander around. I also remember how angry the burly nurse was when she came in to give me the shot. She was so upset, why I do not know, that she jabbed the 2-inch needle viciously into my rump, and it got stuck in my hip bone. She had to use a pair of pliers to pull out the needle. I'm not kidding, that really happened. To make matters worse, hepatitis developed in my bone marrow from the unsterile needle. Within a few days, my liver swelled to 7 times its normal size and started interfering with the functioning of my other organs. It was pressing against my diaphragm, and it was impossible for me to take a full breath. The doctors told my mother I had a 50-50 chance of surviving. After 3 months of trying to fight off the infection, I had no energy for even the most trivial activity and started looking like a dying person. My skin had a yellow-gray hue, and my eye sockets were sunken and dark. Inside, I was experiencing the death of my nascent ego, and I became passive and withdrawn. Then, thankfully, my parents moved from South Chicago to the prairie in Blue Island, Illinois. By the time we got settled in our new home, there was not much left in the world I really cared about, and maybe that is how I became sensitized to other things. I was transfixed by being in raw nature and spent hours walking alone in the extensive prairie land behind our house. Being outdoors in the sun brought me back to life. For some reason, I started drinking the cloudy white, bitter sap of milkweed thistles and chewing the leaves, even though I was warned repeatedly it was poisonous. Years later, I learned that the plant is the source of silymarin, which is a liver restorer. So close was I to nature. One day that summer, a swirling breeze kicked up in our backyard, and I decided to playfully follow it. I cannot even say with certainty that I was following the same breeze all the time, it was just a game. Anyway, the gentle wind led me to a dirt path that went deep into the heart of the prairie. As I walked along the path, the plants and bushes along it suddenly started glowing and intensifying in color. I remember pausing and wondering if this iridescent display was just something in my head or if other people could see it too. I continued along the path following the warm breeze, when I came to a gaping hole in the ground in front of a solitary, old oak tree. How the hole got there, I had no clue, but it exposed the flesh-colored clay to a depth of about 8 feet. The earthy smell was so strong that it nearly choked me, yet there was something beguiling about that hole. I stood teetering at the edge for the longest time. To this day, I am not sure what happened next. It was as if there were two great holes, one in the ground and another in me, and by our similarity, we merged into some sort of all-encompassing cosmic whole. Then, the yellow clay walls of the hole appeared to give off a faint golden light. I did not question a thing I was seeing. It all seemed to be occurring quite naturally. But then the light was all around me, and it felt like this golden light was all there was anywhere, just this translucent light. The space around me had changed, and I was being enfolded by it. This did not seem natural at all. For the first time since entering the prairie that day, I was afraid. As I stood on the edge of the precipice, I was torn between wanting to run away and wanting to jump in the hole and disappear into this deep new mystery. I started trembling from the enormity of the experience, when from out of nowhere, I heard my mother's voice calling me. It could not have been her, since I was miles from home, yet I heard her yell my name, fetching me home, offering the comforts of television, dinner, and Dad. I yanked myself from the edge of the hole and felt my body running as fast as it could until I reached home. In one giant leap, I jumped from the back door into the center of the kitchen, but my parents thought I was just playing and totally ignored me. I wanted to shout out what happened, but I never said a word to anyone because there was no way to put it into words. Plus, for some reason, I felt I had done something wrong. I spent a lot of time thinking about the experience and trying to find a logical explanation. Was I hallucinating from too much milkweed? Did I suffer an epileptic fit or transient ischemic attack of some kind? Did I have a brain tumor? Was I suppressing memories of being molested or even abducted by someone or something? Was I going insane? Did I have some sort of near-death experience? Or was it just a kid's overactive imagination? The biggest question was, what if I had let go at the edge and jumped into that cosmic hole? Would I have entered some new dimension or been absorbed into nothingness? Or would I have merged with the golden light that seemed so safe and warm? One odd feeling that stayed with me after the experience was the mystical or non-tangible sense of eightness or eight space, as I later came to call it. This was the central mystery of the event that has stayed with me all these years. I can still feel the enigmatic sensation of twisting into a different kind of space, something based on eightness. Not the 4 square cubic space of which I was accustomed. I spent years researching the mystical and paranormal experiences of others and discovered a lot more questions than answers. I realized that encounters like mine were fundamental human experiences shared by people from around the world. The problem is that the phenomenon is so deeply rooted in our minds that it is nearly impossible to face it objectively. Nearly everyone takes a position based on their academic training, psychological history, or religious backgrounds. Fortunately, I was too young to have any framework into which to mold the experience, so I just accepted it as is. Any objective explanation I found for the experience corrupted it. It had to be experienced to be understood. Introvertive monistic experiences. The discovery of our monadic inner core is a life-changing experience. It becomes a rock or spiritual talisman around which we can build our entire lives on a solid, omnipresent foundation. In his study of mystical experiences, Walter Terence Stace identified this experience of the personal monad as an introvertive monadic experience that looks inward into the mind to achieve pure consciousness. An introvertive experience is one in which the attention is directed inward, focusing on one's inner world or innermost feelings. For Stace, this is a personal state of consciousness beyond words that does not have an object, or technically speaking, it is an experience phenomenologically not of anything. Stace sometimes refers to this state as unitary consciousness. Like his extrovertive monistic experience, Stace's introvertive monistic experience involves a blissful sense of thought-free objectivity and is similarly paradoxical and ineffable. However, Stace considers the universal introvertive monistic experience, in the personal monad, to be an advanced mystical awareness that is a gateway or even surpasses the experience of universal extrovertive consciousness of the greater monad. Religious scholar Richard H. Jones disagrees with Stace's assessment and argues in his book Philosophy of Mysticism, Raids on the Ineffable, 2016, that extrovertive experiences of the greater monad are not just stinted introvertive ones, but full experiences in their own right. And that is the position I am taking in this book. Many of the extrovertive experiences of the greater monad, Jones notes, are interpreted in terms of the mystical practice that led to the experience and may appear to be diverse, personalized or introspective encounters. Robert Charles Zahner labeled this class of encounters, in which there is an experience of God or one's idea of God, as theistic. He also identified a type of introvertive monadic experience he named panenhenic, all in one, which is an experience of the oneness of nature with oneself included. In his book The Problem of Pure Consciousness, Mysticism and Philosophy, 1993, Robert Foreman called the experience of the lesser monad a pure conscious event, or PCE. According to Foreman, a PCE consists of an emptying out by a person of all experiential content and phenomenological qualities, such as concepts, thoughts, sensory perceptions, and sensuous images, but the subject remains in a state of pure wakeful consciousness. Foreman describes his own PCE as an empty consciousness from which one need not awake. Foreman cited several examples of PCE found in sacred texts from around the world. He mentions the Buddhist philosopher Paramartha, 499 to 569 c., who wrote that every aspect of our experience of reality depends on or is conditioned by our thoughts, except for the monistic non-sensory or unconditioned Buddhist experience of emptiness, Nirvana. Foreman also discusses the PCEs of Christian mystic Eckhart von Hochheim, 1260 to 1328, known as Meister, master. Eckhart, who described a kind of forgetting that abandons concepts and sense experience to sink into a mystical oblivion. Eckhart's experiences of both the personal monad and the greater monad led him to conclude that our individual soul and God are one or share a common ground. He wrote, "God wants nothing of you but the gift of a peaceful heart. Unmovable disinterest brings man into the likeness of God. To be full of things is to be empty of God. To be empty of things is to be full of God. We are all meant to be mothers of God, for God is always needing to be born." Following are some general characteristics shared by those who report having introvertive monistic experiences. Introvertive monistic experiences. 1. The experience often begins with an awareness of unusual light. 2. Attention is directed inward, focusing on one's innermost feelings. 3. The mind is suspended in a state of wakeful consciousness. 4. Thoughts are secondary to the experience, which seems to be perceived on a deeper level of being. 5. There is a sense of slow-moving or suspended time. 6. There is a refreshing sense of wholeness or a solidly integrated self. 7. A feeling of personal freedom or release from worldly concerns dominates. 8. There is a deeper appreciation of nature or sense of oneness with it. 9. Sometimes unique insights or fresh perspectives of common situations or problems are presented. 10. In describing the experience to others, it remains beyond words. Rumi's monadic love. Jalal ad-Din Muhammad ar-Rumi, 1207 to 1273, was a Persian scholar, poet, and mystic whose writings have been widely translated, and to this day, he is one of the most popular and best-selling poets in America. Rumi believed that poetry and music allowed devotees the freedom necessary to focus their whole being intensely on the divine presence in the world. Suddenly, their souls would be simultaneously destroyed and resurrected, and they would merge with the monadic mind of the whole universe. This idea became the spiritual foundation of the whirling dervishes of the Sufi sect. Whatever personal experiences fueled Rumi's amazing spiritual insights, we do know that he connected with a monadic reality beyond time and space. "My soul is from elsewhere," he said. "I'm sure of that, and I intend to end up there. I existed when there were neither names nor the things that are named." Rumi's basic philosophy was grounded in the Islamic principle of tawhid, which is the indivisible oneness or monadic wholeness of God. For Rumi, tawhid is practiced most fully through love, which he calls that flame which, when it blazes up, burns away everything except the everlasting beloved. The Italian poet Dante described his platonic relationship to Beatrice similarly. For both men, the purest expression of higher love is to negate one's own existence, to burn up one's own ego. In his epic 25,000-verse poem Masnavi, 1272, Rumi describes how the monadic unity of being he has experienced is true for all souls, because we as individuals are in whatever form our consciousness takes forever part of the one. I died to the mineral state and became a plant. I died to the vegetal state and reached animality. I died to the animal state and became a man. Then what should I fear? I have never become less from dying. At the next charge forward I will die to human nature, so that I may lift up my head and wings and soar among the angels, and I must also jump from the river of the state of the angel. Everything perishes except his face. Once again I will become sacrificed from the state of the angel. I will become that which cannot come into the imagination. The theology of divine love taught by Rumi requires us to die before you die, to remove all traces of our lower selves, including our personal identity and will, until only the beloved remains. At that point, only the pure monadic soul remains, immortal and united with the greater monad, like a candle flame lost in the glare of the rising sun. Tennyson's experience of no self. Alfred Lord Tennyson, 1809 to 1892, was the poet laureate of Britain during Queen Victoria's reign and remains one of the most popular poets in the English language. From childhood, Tennyson had a sense of a greater spiritual reality and cultivated it throughout his adult life. In January 1869, he told a group of friends, "It is true there are moments when the flesh is nothing to me, when I feel and know the flesh to be the vision and the spiritual the only truth. Depend upon it, the spiritual is the real. It belongs to one more than the hand and the foot. You may tell me that my hand and my foot are only imaginary symbols of my existence, but you never will you convince me that the I am is not an eternal reality, and that the spiritual is not the true and real part of me." In his poem Ancient Sage, he elaborates on the monadic consciousness he senses behind everyday reality. "More than once when I sat all alone, revolving in myself, the word that is the symbol of myself, the mortal limit of the self was loosed, and passed into the nameless, as a cloud melts into heaven. I touched my limbs, the limbs were strange, not mine and yet no shade of doubt, but utter clearness, and through loss of cell, the gain of such large life as matched with ours, were sun to spark unshadowable in words, themselves but shadows of a shadow world." Something to try. Tennyson's method. This is a very simple exercise that leads to the experience of personal annihilation required to enter the monadic mind. Tennyson first spoke of it publicly. When he was asked if he had ever used drugs to achieve his mystical insights, Tennyson responded, "I have never had any revelations through anesthetics, drugs, but a kind of waking trance. This, for lack of a better word, I have frequently had, quite up from boyhood, when I have been all alone. This has come upon me through repeating my own name to myself silently, till all at once, as it were out of the intensity of the consciousness of individuality. Individuality itself seemed to dissolve and fade away into boundless being, and this not a confused state but the clearest, the surest of the surest. Utterly beyond words, where death was an almost laughable impossibility, the loss of personality seeming no extinction, but the only true life. Yet, I am ashamed of my feeble description. Have I not said the state is utterly beyond words? So, the method is simply to enter a relaxed state in a private place and say your name to yourself over and over for at least 3 or 4 minutes, or until you have completely exhausted its meaning. You can say your first name or first and last. To yourself or out loud, it doesn't matter. What remains after this short exercise is a clarified monadic state of mind in which the ego has been temporarily extinguished. Try to experience the boundless being of which Tennyson speaks before your ego returns and you start focusing on the outside world again. Wordsworth's Intimations of Immortality. William Wordsworth, 1770 to 1850, was an eminent English Romantic poet who served as Poet Laureate of Britain. He had several introspective monastic experiences while alone in nature that became the basis for his belief that the pervasive presence of the divine mind is most evident in unspoiled nature. He described this feeling in his poem Tintern Abbey, 1790. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply infused, whose dwelling is the light of the setting suns, and the round ocean, and the living air, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man. Wordsworth elaborates on the powerful relation between the human mind and nature in his Prospectus to the Recluse, 1814. How exquisitely the individual mind, and the progressive powers perhaps no less of the whole species, to the external world is fitted, and how exquisitely, to theme this but little heard of among men, the external world is fitted to the mind, and the creation, by no lower name can it be called, which they with blended might accomplish. Wordsworth sees consciousness embedded in all objects of nature. Nothing is too low or repulsive, since everything that is present in the universe is part of the unitary mind or monad. That infinite living mind is responsible for the endless diversity in nature and can serve as the source of healing, capable of purifying the tormented little minds of human beings. For Wordsworth, the purity of perception and intent in one's consciousness are the most important characteristics for understanding the hidden truths of nature. To him, children are closest to their original souls and make the best philosophers. Yet as children become adulterated, or more worldly, they lose their divine vision. This idea is the theme of Wordsworth's greatest work, Intimations of Immortality, 1807. The first stanza of Intimations of Immortality laments the poet's inability to see the divine glory of nature as he did as a child. There was a time when meadow, grove, and stream, the earth, and every common sight, to me did seem apparelled in celestial light, the glory and the freshness of a dream. It is not now as it has been of yore. Turn wheresoe'er I may, by night or day, the things which I have seen I now can see no more. In stanza 5, the poet begins describing the pre-existing monadic soul within each of us, and then goes on to explain how humans start in an ideal world that slowly fades into a shadowy life. Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life's star, hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar, not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. Heaven lies about us in our infancy. Shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy. But he beholds the light, and whence it flows, he sees it in his joy. The youth, who daily farther from the east must travel, still is nature's priest, and by the vision splendid is on his way attended. At length the man perceives it die away, and fade into the light of common day. As the 11th stanza poem continues, Wordsworth describes how the glories of nature the child experienced are relegated to the past, as the child's understanding of mortality moves into its life, like dark clouds blocking the sun. In other words, the child is able to see what others do not see because children do not fully accept their own mortality. The poem ends with the affirmation that the poet and the reader, though matured through time, are able to return to the original state of innocence because the faculty of imagination allows an adult to intimate immortality, to reach out silently to the soul in indirect insinuation, and to join in open and honest fellowship with other souls when one gets beyond the adult ego and its ties to the material world. Whitman's Light of the Personal Monad. Walt Whitman, 1819 to 1892, is one of America's favorite poets. His popular poetry collection, Leaves of Grass, was first published in 1855 with his own money, and the poems were so unique that he soon became a revolutionary icon in American literature. His poetry reached out to the common person with a deep validation of everyday life. Reviewers proclaimed him the prophet of democracy. But Leaves of Grass, which he completed at the age of 36, was the culmination of a series of deeply personal transcendent experiences that began in his early 30s. These experiences were marked by, in Whitman's words, ineffable light rare, untellable, lighting the very light beyond all signs, description, languages. Whitman came to understand that the universe was whole and complete in itself, with no difference between the mind of the Creator and its creations. In monadic philosophy, all our individual selves are like cells of consciousness, yet still part of the universal self, or monad. That is to say that every person is an individual self with their own identity. Yet the universe maintains the idea of a universal self, in which everything is indistinguishable and interconnected. I celebrate myself, and what I assume you shall assume, Whitman told his readers, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. In Song of Myself, 1855, Whitman tries to free both the poet and the reader from cultural restraints to grasp the greater monadic reality. The self he is celebrating is not the limited personal self, but the expanded self of the universal mind. The heart of reality is the pure monadic consciousness of this universal self, and it is that knowledge that Whitman wants people to experience. This insight allows Whitman to see the inner beauty in all things and feel the need to enjoy everything from a blade of grass to another human being. And I know that the hand of God is in the elder hand of my own, he wrote, and I know that the Spirit of God is the eldest brother of my own, and that all the men ever born are also my brothers, and the women my sisters and lovers, and that a kelson of the creation is love, and limitless are leaves stiff or drooping in the fields, and brown ants in the little wells beneath them, and mossy scabs of the worm fence, and heaped stones, and elder and millen and pokeweed. In his book Democratic Vistas, 1871, Whitman describes the experience of the personal monad. There is, in sanest hours, a consciousness, a thought that rises, independent, lifted out from all else calm, like the stars, shining eternal. This is the thought of identity, yours for you, whoever you are, as mine for me. Miracle of miracles, beyond statement, most spiritual and vaguest of earth's dreams, yet hardest basic fact, and the only entrance to all facts. In such devout hours, in the midst of the significant wonders of heaven and earth, significant only because of the me in the center, creeds and conventions fall away and become of no account before this simple idea. Under the luminousness of real vision, it alone takes possession, takes value. Like the shadowy dwarf in the fable, once liberated and looked upon, it expands over the whole earth and spreads to the roof of heaven. In Whitman's complicated symbology, the shadowy dwarf in the fable refers to Vamana, an avatar of the Hindu god Vishnu. Vishnu, who is the second god in the Hindu divine triumvirate, acts as the protector and preserver of the universe, and his role is to return to the world in troubled times to restore balance and order. When an evil demon seizes control of the earth, Vishnu is reborn in the form of the dwarf Vamana and pays a visit to the demon. But the demon knows the dwarf is really the great god Vishnu and offers him a gift out of respect. Vishnu asks for just 3 paces measure of land to use as his sacrificial ground, and the demon agrees. At that moment, Vishnu expands to the size of the whole universe and takes 3 strides that cover the whole of creation. In Whitman's illusion, the insignificant dwarf symbolizes the miracle of consciousness we all take for granted that once liberated and looked upon fills the whole universe. Continuing in his book Democratic Vistas, Whitman makes clear that the seemingly insignificant bit of consciousness each of us possesses, in the personal monad, is the most important thing in our lives. Only in the perfect uncontamination and solitariness of individuality, only here, in the meditation, the devout ecstasy, the soaring flight, in communion with the mysteries, only here the soul emerges. And all statements, churches, sermons, melt away like vapors. The interior consciousness, like a hitherto unseen inscription, in magic ink, beams out its wondrous lines to the senses. Bibles may convey, and priests expound, but it is exclusively for the noiseless operation of one's isolated self, to enter the pure ether of veneration, reach the divine levels, and commune with the unutterable. For Whitman, the only real faculty we possess is pure direct experience that takes place in our interior consciousness through the noiseless operation of one's isolated self. That pure direct experience can also be focused within, moving beyond all sensations, thoughts, and feelings. One experiences pure consciousness by itself without an external object. The mind has settled inward and bounded and fully awake within itself in timeless communion with its monadic source. In the following lines from his passage to India, 1870, Whitman speaks directly to the monadic source at the center of all multiverses, the origin of all the deep undercurrents we feel in ourselves of truth, goodness, and beauty. For Whitman, everything depends on transcending himself, of moving out of myself to achieve a clear perspective of what is real. It is an ode to his love and longing to return to the monadic state. O thou transcendent, nameless, the fiber and the breath, light of the light, shedding forth universes, thou center of them, thou mightier center of the true, the good, the loving, thou moral, spiritual fountain, affection's source, thou reservoir. O pensive soul of me, O thirst and satisfied, waitest not there, waitest not haply for us somewhere there, the comrade perfect. Thou pulse, thou motive of the stars, suns, systems, that, circling, move in order, safe, harmonious, athwart the shapeless vastnesses of space. How should I think, how breathe a single breath, how speak, if, out of myself, I could not launch to those superior universes? Richard Bick's Cosmic Consciousness. Dr. Richard Maurice Bick, 1837–1902, was a Canadian psychiatrist who became famous for his monumental study of cosmic consciousness, which he defined simply as a higher state of consciousness than we experience in everyday life. Just a year before his death, he published his decades-long research in a book titled Cosmic Consciousness, A Study in the Evolution of the Human Mind, 1901. Bick's interest in the subject was piqued by an experience he had at the age of 35 after an evening in the British countryside with his friend, the great poet Walt Whitman. While Bick was traveling back to London in a buggy, he fell into a state of quiet relaxation and passive awareness. Then, he recalled, all at once, without warning of any kind, I found myself wrapped around by some sort of flame-colored cloud. For an instant I thought of fire, but then in the next instant, I knew that the light was within me. Directly afterward came upon me a sense of exultation, of immense joyousness accompanied by an intellectual illumination quite impossible to describe. Into my brain streamed one momentary lightning flash of the cosmic splendor which has ever since lightened my life. Among other things, I did not come to believe anything. I saw and knew that the cosmos is not dead matter but a living presence, that the soul of man is immortal, that the universe is so built and ordered that without any peradventure, all things work together for the good of each and all, that the foundation principle of a world is what we might call love, and that the happiness of everyone in the long run is absolutely certain. I learned more within the few seconds that illumination lasted than in all my previous years of study, and I learned much that no study could ever have taught. After years of research, Boehme developed a theory that posited 3 stages in the development of consciousness. 1. The simple consciousness of animals. 2. The self-consciousness of the mass of humanity. And 3. Cosmic consciousness, an emerging faculty which is the next stage of human development. Boehme discovered that the age of the illumination is most often in the range from 30 to 40 years, with the average age 36. He was also able to define 6 fundamental characteristics of cosmic consciousness. 1. The sudden or unexpected elevation to a new state of universal awareness from a mundane or everyday state of consciousness. 2. The subjective experience of being enveloped by light, i.e., inner light. 3. An intellectual illumination of direct knowing of reality. 4. A psychological or moral elevation that adds charm or poise to the personality. 5. The loss of a sense of sin or feelings of guilt. 6. The sense of immortality and loss of the fear of death. The golden white light encountered in both extrovertive and introvertive encounters with the monad is a defining property of Boehme's cosmic consciousness. In the extrovertive experience of the greater monad, the light becomes the boundless space in which the experience takes place. This same light seems to break through into our everyday world in introvertive experiences of the personal or lesser monad. A distilled or empty, pure consciousness seems to be the common gateway to both kinds of monadic experiences. Almost all of Dr. Boehme's cases of cosmic consciousness involve some form of experience with light. Most often his subjects reported being enveloped by a warm light that seems to originate from within the mind, although in a few cases, the light was also witnessed by others. The following are some examples from Boehme's work that associated the experience of light with the gaining of cosmic consciousness. I left a friend I was visiting and was walking slowly homeward, enjoying the calm beauty of the evening, when I became conscious of an unutterable stillness, and simultaneously every object about me became bathed in a soft light clearer and more ethereal than I had ever before seen. God is all, I thought in my soul. On my return home, both my husband and his sister remarked about a change in my face. An infinite peace and joy filled my heart. Worldly ambitions and cares died in the light of the glorious truth that was revealed to me. All anxiety and trouble about the future had utterly left me, and my life is now one long song of love and peace. C.Y. After being ill for some time, a time came when I had given up all hope and felt there was nothing more for me to live for or to look forward to. One day while in this state, I was lying quietly in my bed when a great calmness seemed to come over me. I fell asleep only to wake a few hours after, to find myself in a flood of light. I was alarmed, and I sat up in my bed. I would not call the nurse, as I felt she would not understand. I did not, of course, understand it myself, but I felt it meant something profound. This same calmness came to me often, and it always came before the light. After that night, my recovery was steady without the aid of a physician. When the light came to me again later, I asked my husband if he did not see it, but he did not. I have not tried to cultivate it, as I do not understand it. I only know that whereas formerly I was a wreck, I am today well and strong physically and mentally. At the time I first saw the light, I was 24 years old. I have seen it 3 times altogether. I think the intellect could never give to me in worlds of study what is revealed to me during this experience and immediately following the presence of the light. To me it is beyond intellectual expression. It is seeing inwardly, and the word harmony would perhaps express part of what is seen. J.S. The subjective light, it seems to me, is magnetic or electric. Some force is liberated in the brain and nervous system. Some explosion takes place, and the fire that burned in the breast is now a mounting flame. In my experience, the subjective light was not something seen. It was a sensation distinct from an individual emotion. It was the pure emotion itself, or its ecstasy. It was all the gladness and rapture of love, so intensified that it became an ocean of living, palpitating light, the brightness of which outshone the brightness of the sun, its glow, warmth, and tenderness filling the universe. That infinite ocean is the eternal soul of nature. There is nothing in the universe to compare with it, such joyous repose and sweet unconcern, saying to us, with tenderest love, all is well. CMC. When in deep agony, a sidelight was flashed upon my soul, with almost blinding suddenness. If you could find a beginning, would not that beginning be itself an end? I had fallen, striking my head, and I lost consciousness. In regaining possession of myself, I passed through all the evolutionary experiences of becoming conscious. In the first stage, I simply was aware of the fact that I was something. What that was, I neither knew nor cared to know. I did not know what knowing was. I was calm, blissfully happy, and to me there was no past nor any future. There was to me no time, no place, no anything, save that tiny speck of consciousness that was me. As there was nothing to note to determine duration, how long that stage lasted is incomprehensible. A vision of higher consciousness had come to me, not from without, but through the gates which opened inwardly. With that unfolding consciousness there came a suffusion, as of a delicate cloud or haze, which searched my entire body. It was more invasive than light, more penetrating than heat, more enreaching than electricity. It was as if I had been plunged into a bath of fluid more subtle and permeating than ether. Against the inflow and outflow of that enswathing essence, my body was not as resistant as the air to a bird's wing or a morning mist to the sunbeam. The rapture, the exaltation, the divinity of that moment passes knowledge. Then, swiftly came the awe of the mysterious presence that filled me, and the consciousness of the whole of the universe went thrilling through me not as a thought, a sensation, or an emotion, but as the vital breath of God. This grew until I found myself rising and expanding into the infinite, being diffused and lost therein, until the mind and body reeled. I sank on my bed and slept like a child. A few hours later I woke in a kind of joy, which was unspeakable and full of glory. The haze or light was more felt than seen. The mind slowly passed from fear into a distinct consciousness of some seemingly extranatural event. I always have believed that the event primarily was subjective, but a subjective experience which was in perfect accord with the entire objective universe. It was the exaltation of the subjective in me to a new relation with the objective in earth and heaven. Carpenter's Universal Consciousness. Edward Carpenter, 1844 to 1929, was an English utopian philosopher, poet, anthologist, and early activist for gay rights and prison reform. As a writer, he is best known for his book Civilization, Its Cause and Cure, 1889, in which he describes civilization as a disease through which human societies must suffer. Although he rarely spoke of his personal experiences of monadic consciousness, he did speak of it in general terms in a letter to researcher Dr. Richard Maurispic. The perception seems to be one in which all the senses unite into one sense in which you become the object, he wrote. But this is unintelligible mentally speaking. I do not think the matter can be defined as yet. But I do not know that there is any harm in writing about something true yet beyond our grasp. In his book Towards Democracy, 1883, Carpenter tried to show the importance of freedom of consciousness to the evolution of humanity, and he drew a clear distinction between the common level of self-consciousness and the emerging monadic or universal consciousness that is part of our future development as sentient beings. There is in every man a local consciousness connected with his quite external body that we know. Are there not also in every man the making of a universal consciousness? That there are in us phases of consciousness which transcend the limit of the bodily senses is a matter of daily experience. May there, then, not be in us the makings of a perception and knowledge which shall not be relative to this body, which is here and now, but which shall be good for all time and everywhere? Does there not exist an inner illumination, of which what we call light in the outer world is its partial expression and manifestation, by which we can ultimately see things as they are, beholding all of creation not by any local act of perception, but by a cosmical intuition and presence, identifying ourselves with what we see? In the axioms of logic, what is known by our local and temporary consciousness is known for the moment beyond question. Similarly, what is known by our permanent and universal consciousness is permanently known beyond the possibility of questioning. One of the chapters from Carpenter's India Travels memoir From Adam's Peak to Elephanta, 1892, has gained popularity in recent times and is often included as an appendix in modern editions of his works. The chapter is Consciousness Without Thought, in which he tries to explain the unique unitary or universal consciousness of the gurus and meditators he met in India. The West seeks the individual consciousness. Carpenter writes, the enriched mind, ready perceptions and memories, individual hopes and fears, ambition, loves, conquests the self, the local self, in all its phases and forms, and sorely doubts whether such a thing as universal consciousness exists. The East seeks the universal consciousness, and in those cases where it succeeds, individual self and daily life thin away to a mere film and are viewed as only the shadows cast by the glory revealed beyond. The individual consciousness takes the form of thought, which is fluid and mobile like quicksilver, perpetually in a state of change and unrest, fraught with pain and effort. The other universal consciousness is not in the form of thought. It touches, hears, sees, and is those things which it perceives without motion, without change, without effort, without distinction of subject and object, but with a vast and incredible joy of being. Douglas Harding's Headlessness. Douglas Edison Harding, 1909 to 2007, was a British philosopher who expanded on previous ideas of the personal monad in his universe explorer model, which he described in his book The Hierarchy of Heaven and Earth, 1952. Harding's model of consciousness ranks the layers of matter and mind from the galaxies to atomic particles. For Harding, we are human only at a certain range. Closer to our center, we become cellular, molecular, atomic. Very close to our center, we are almost nothing, a plethoric emptiness he dubbed nothingness. At the very center of all these personal layers is a clear sphere, which symbolizes one's true nature or no face. In his book On Having No Head, 1961, Harding described the experience that changed his life. It happened in 1942, when I was 33 years old, that I made the discovery while hiking in the Himalayas. Here tote. What actually happened was something absurdly simple and unspectacular. I stopped thinking. A peculiar quiet, an odd kind of alert limpness or numbness, came over me. Reason and imagination and all mental chatter died down. For once, words really failed me. Past and future dropped away. I forgot who and what I was, my name, manhood, animalhood, all that could be called mine. It was as if I had been born that instant, brand new, mindless, innocent of all memories. There existed only the now, that present moment and what was clearly given in it. To look was enough, and what I found was khaki trousers terminating downwards in a pair of brown shoes, he continued, khaki sleeves terminating sideways in a pair of pink hands, and a khaki shirt front terminating upwards in absolutely nothing whatever. Certainly not in a head. It took me no time at all to notice that this nothing, this hole where a head should have been, no ordinary vacancy. No mere nothing. On the contrary, it was very much occupied. It was a vast emptiness vastly filled, a nothing that found room for everything, room for grass, trees, shadowy distant hills, and far above them snow peaks like a row of angular clouds riding the blue sky. I had lost a head and gained a world. It was self-luminous reality for once swept clean of all obscuring mind. It was the revelation, at long last, of the perfectly obvious. It was a lucid moment in a confused life history. It was a ceasing to ignore something which, since early childhood at any rate, I had always been too busy or too clever to see. It was naked, uncritical attention to what had all along been staring me in the face, my utter facelessness. Harding's description of having no head brings to mind Rumi's verse. Behead yourself. Dissolve your whole body into vision. Become seeing, seeing, seeing. Robert Revell's resonating clarity. Robert A. Revell B., 1965, is an American author and therapist who is known for his work in consciousness studies. Beginning in his youth and continuing into his adult life, Revell experienced many instances of universal consciousness, which came to him in a peaceful presence of mind he later referred to simply as clarity. He described one of these early experiences in his book The Fifth Phenomenon, 2018. I'm sitting on the stoop of my grandmother's house in the Hunters Point district of San Francisco circa 1974. The sun is out, and warm all over my body. At this moment, I don't feel hungry, or tired, or sore, or worried, or bored. There is nothing missing. In this moment I feel that specific kind of lightness of being that can only come with being 9 years old on a sunny summer day. I'm not thinking about God, but in this unencumbered moment I feel clearly the presence of the Creator. It is as real as the warmth and light of the sun on my body. What I sense is a living thing, not an idea or a concept deity like the one they are talking about in church. That God was always something foreign to my nature, thrust into my world by people that felt strange and possessed of something heavy and unnatural. But there is nothing outside of this presence I feel here and now, and I can perceive it moving everywhere all at once. I close my eyes and swim in the body of it. This feeling and other special moments Revell felt as a child became the foundation for an inner world that was in stark contrast to the superficial outer world where such concepts were never spoken of, though interior peace often runs in stark contrast to the external environments of my youth. Revell commented, "The resonance of that sublime connection never wanes, it never forsakes me." In his book, Revell uses his personal experiences to develop the art of depth consciousness for individual exploration. He proposes that consciousness is its own dimensional phenomenon and a fifth operational feature in our universe. Author's introvertive experience of the monad. One of my clearest experiences of monadic reality happened quite accidentally. I have been diabetic for over 20 years, and taking insulin shots 3 to 4 times a day became a mindless routine. However, in October 1997, I mistakenly took 100 units of insulin from a fast-acting vial instead of the long-acting vial. That much fast-acting insulin would kill a normal person, so I called the emergency room and asked what I should do. Someone on the line told me to eat a lot of sugar and it should be all right. So, I looked for as much sugary stuff as I could find. Fortunately, it was close to Halloween, and we had a giant bag of Tootsie Rolls registered on hand. I could already feel waves of weakness sweeping through my muscles, so I lay down in my bed with my glucose meter and the bag of Tootsie Rolls registered next to me. I was eating as many Tootsie Rolls registered as I could jam down, but my blood sugar level continued to drop rapidly. Before long, I was unable to get out of bed. Glucose is the fuel for contracting muscles, so when you have really low blood sugar, it is almost impossible to move. Then, for the life of me, I suddenly could not figure out how to use my glucose meter or even how to unwrap a Tootsie Roll registered. The brain runs on glucose but cannot store it and hence requires a continuous supply. Over 60% of the utilization of glucose in the whole body goes to the brain. Brains even taste sweet, so I am The last reading I was able to record was 38, and I could feel my body shutting down. It was harder and harder to create a thought, and then suddenly, I simply could think no more. But there was still something left, a silent pure awareness, an observer beyond words and embodiment. I found myself in a quiet expanse of warm golden light. There was only one thing everywhere there. There was no me at distinction, no observing things. I was everything and everything was me. Whatever had taken away my thoughts, it did not matter at this point, had also taken away the possibility of fear. This space was so full and complete. There was nothing else left to know, and it was all good. There was also no sense of time. There was only one moment there, and it felt as if eternity was the primal ground of my being. It was all perfect, and there was no need to strive or change anything. I had somehow become fully matured, completed and whole. The experience was beyond happiness. This was bliss. Finally, the Tootsie Rolls registered started to kick in, and I was being pulled back into time and space. I remember my first thought as I tried to find words for what I became there. The only phrase that came to mind was "I am that I am," but not in the biblical sense. What it meant to me was "I am that I am," that is, my essence is this state of eternal being. Many experiencers describe it with those exact same words. I had slipped into a diabetic coma that lasted over 2 hours. As I slowly regained consciousness, I remember thinking how cold, hard, and gray everything was in the room. No one else was home, so I laid there eating more Tootsie Rolls registered until I was finally able to get out of bed. I have experienced the monad deliberately too. I was led to these experiences after years of researching ancient spiritual traditions from the perspective of alchemical psychology. I discovered meditations actually used by practitioners in their search for a state of purifying consciousness that gave them access to the monad, or what became known in the Middle Ages as the Unus Mundus, one world, the underlying unified reality from which everything emerges and to which everything returns. I found other useful techniques for doing this in the Dzogchen tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, which focuses on discovering the ultimate ground of existence. I have discussed many of these meditations in some detail in my books and workshops on personal transformation. But the most useful techniques I have used to approach the monad focus on developing a state of pure consciousness without an object or any thoughts occupying the mind. This state is difficult to achieve because of the constant egocentric chatter inside our heads, but it seems to be the one requirement for experiencing monadic consciousness.